Hello and welcome back to the Trinity Student Managed Fund podcast with me, Emanuele Roncalli di Montorio-Veronese, where I speak with leaders in the world of business, finance and technology to give our students a better insight into the careers we may wish to pursue. Today's episode is sponsored by Setanta Asset Management, a Dublin-based boutique investment manager specialising in equity and multi-asset strategies with a fundamental value approach since 1998. With a proven track record of strong performance and 13.2 billion euros in active assets under management, Setanta serves a diverse client base, including institutional insurance, pension funds, charities and family offices across Ireland, Germany, Canada and the United States, applying a long-term investment philosophy that clients value. Today I sit down with Dr. Colin Hunt, CEO of AIB. In March of 2019, Dr. Hunt was appointed Chief Executive Officer of AIB Group and an Executive Director on the AIB Board, following his initial role with the group as Managing Director of the Wholesale, Institutional and Corporate Banking Division, which he began in August of 2016. Before joining AIB, Dr. Hunt was Managing Director at Macquarie Capital, where he spearheaded the development of its operations in Ireland. His career also includes roles as Special Policy Advisor in the Departments of Transport and Finance, Research Director and Chief Economist at Goodbody Stockbrokers, Head of Trading Research and Senior Economist at Bank of Ireland Group Treasury, and a Country Risk Analyst at NatWest. From 2008 to 2014, Dr. Hunt served as a Non-Executive Director of Lingus Group. He currently holds external board positions with the Ireland Funds and IBEC. Dr. Hunt holds a PhD in Economics from Trinity College Dublin and degrees in Commerce and Economics from University College Cork. He is a Chartered Bank Director and a Fellow of the Institute of Bankers. I really hope you enjoy this conversation with Dr. Colin Hunt.
Dr. Colin Hunt, thank you so much for taking the time and welcome back to the Trinity SMF. We obviously had you at our Leadership Perspective Conference in 2023, so thank you for taking the time to come back again.
My pleasure. Delighted to be with you this morning.
So I'd love to go into your career because there's a lot of interesting points here I'd love to talk about. But could we start at the very beginning? I'd love to know, back before your days at Trinity and your masters, could you go and tell our listeners about kind of what your thoughts were at the time at university, and did you always want to pursue a career in finance?
Oh my God! When I was in school, I studied economics, and I was very interested in economics, and I was reasonably good at it, or at least that's what I was told. And I then had a decision to make as to what I would study in university, and certainly economics was going to be core to that, and ended up choosing to do a general business degree in UCC. I was originally from Waterford, so that was the nearest university to us, and I had family members there in the past. And when I was there, I suppose, over the course of the 4 years, it became abundantly clear to me that economics was where my heart was, and ultimately that led me into finance. And I didn't sort of ever set out to be a banker, and people sort of look at me surprisingly when I say I didn't ever sort of have an aspiration to be the CEO of a pillar banking institution. It was almost as if the path that I found ultimately led to here, but it certainly wasn't a part of a grand plan. There wasn't a blueprint that I decided or I designed in the early 1990s that would have seen me becoming CEO of AIB, but that's what happened.
So it wasn't from day one you had it?
No. And in fact, I would have, if I'm very interested in education. It is an abiding passion of mine, and if you'd asked me when I was starting out in my career in the early 1990s as to what was the likely destination, I would say, well, I'm going to go off and learn about the industry at the coalface, actually working in the banking industry. But ultimately, I would have expected at that stage, I would have ended up as an academic, and would have ended up actually teaching in college. But that's not the way things worked out.
And then looking at your career, and your career journey, like NatWest, to Bank of Ireland, to becoming Chief Economist of Goodbody around the corner, 28 years old. I'd love to know, were there any pivotal moments you saw in your career that really, obviously your significant role at Macquarie,
I suppose the most pivotal role was one of the earliest roles, and that was my time in NatWest, working in the city. Because I would have gone to London 23 years of age, the master's behind me and a primary degree. But it was a fantastic place to work. It was a very exciting place to work, in that they were very eager to push you to the limit. They were very eager to throw responsibility at you, to give you the room to grow and develop. So, I'd spent 4 years doing a primary degree, a year doing a master's, and this was an amazing opportunity to apply my learnings to the real world. And you learn so much when you're actually practicing what you've learned. And I was really, really fortunate to find myself in a very, very interesting role, working in what was known as the country risk team in NatWest, in a bank that was then a very, very international bank with exposures all the way around the world. And at a very, very young age, been given that scope to push yourself and to develop yourself. And that was very, very strongly encouraged by my bosses, by my managers, and it was an extraordinary learning experience. And I found myself doing things that I didn't that I didn't necessarily feel comfortable with. Like I was somebody who, I can remember being asked to teach on a correspondent banking course because of the nature of NatWest business. It had relationships with an awful lot of sort of related banks right the way around the world, and they used to run correspondent banking courses, and I was asked to lecture on country risk, and it wasn't something that I was necessarily overly comfortable with doing, but your bosses backed you to do it, asked you to do it, and seized the opportunity, and that was very personally enriching and a big developmental role, because of course you have to be succinct and a strong communicator, and communication is so key to successful careers, not least in this industry. So it was a very, very important developmental moment for me.
And you've mentioned your bosses there at NatWest, and I know also when you're doing your PhD at Trinity, you're Philip Lane.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe for listeners that aren't aware, the former governor of the Bank of Ireland, obviously now Chief Economist at ECB. I mean, were there any mentors there? I mean,
Yeah, I've been lucky to have people around me and guiding me through my career. Like Philip is an exceptional economist. He is an outstanding professional. And that is very, very widely recognised. And, I'm very, very grateful to Trinity for giving me the opportunity to return to part-time education in my early 30s to pursue what had been a long-standing ambition to do a PhD. And then, of course, having Philip as supervisor, counsellor, mentor, guide was a huge privilege. And I certainly am very strongly of the view that I would not have completed the PhD, certainly within the time frame that I did, without having the access that I had to his brilliance and his encouragement.
Any key pieces of wisdom he gave you, or even other mentors throughout your career?
Well, discipline is important, particularly when you're balancing your work life. And I was chief economist in Goodbody's and head of research when I started out there doing the PhD. But it is really, really important to prioritize and focus on the end result. So I knew what the outcome I wanted was when you started out in the PhD, which was to complete your thesis, to get through the examination process and qualify as a PhD. And it was wonderfully described to me by somebody at the time as It's not a testament to your brilliance, but it is a testament to your discipline. And you just need to focus on delivering the outcome that you want. And it requires you making sacrifices. It requires you committing time and ensuring that you are meeting all your self-imposed deadlines, and of course deadlines imposed by your supervisor as well. But I suppose it's the success there is driven by your bloody mindedness and your ability to prioritize and just deliver the results to a reasonably tight time frame. Doing a PhD was all-consuming, because it isn't something that you can sort of push to the side. It is with you throughout your waking hours, every single day. It's there, it's in your head. And I have to say that I went about it in an unusual way, in that it was part-time education. And I was really, really fortunate that Trinity gave me that opportunity, but also then, of course, that Trinity gave me Philip as my supervisor, because he had a pivotal role to play in getting me through that challenging 4-year period.
And I'd also love to know, because obviously you've worked as well, not just in the private sector, but the public sector. I'd love to know, what was that as a special advisor? You know, what is that transition like? And
it was, yeah. The subject of my PhD was on capital investment, and on the returns from capital investment, and on the interaction of public and private investment, on cyclicality of capital investment. And I had an opportunity to become a policy advisor in the Department of Transport at a time when the government was planning for a very significant increase in capital investment in infrastructure. So there was a lovely alignment between my personal interests, between my academic work, and the job that I found myself in. And I never intended it to be a career. I went in to work in the public sector for the second half of that administration, that the 02 to 07 administration, but with the very, very clear intention that at the end of it, I was not going to be continuing the public sector, that I was going to do a 2.5-year stint there, and then move on. And probably at that point in time, given the fact that with a good wind, it was likely that I would be qualified as a PhD by the time that particular role was ending. At that point in time, my mind was very firmly towards pursuing that long-term goal that I had of becoming an academic. So doing the PhD was a necessary step on the journey to academia. Now, as things happened, I finished working with the government. I took a number of months out. I spent, I did not know what I was going to do next. I had an assumption that I was going to end up somewhere in the university sector. Took time out to finish the PhD, to that final months-long push to get it done. But I didn't know what I was going to be doing next, and then very late in the day, I took some time out with my wife. We hadn't kids at that stage. And we took a decent holiday, and it was then an opportunity arose for me to go and work with Macquarie, which of course had a big emphasis and a big focus on infrastructure. So it was almost as if it was sort of pre-planned, but it wasn't. It was finding myself in a situation that opportunities arose and seizing the opportunity.
It aligned super nicely.
It did. Yeah, you'd swear it was all pre-planned, but I can assure you it wasn't. just finding myself in a position where opportunities came my way that I didn't expect to get. So then I suppose I went into Macquarie, and it was a great place to work at a very challenging time, because of course the global financial crisis was such a huge part of the early years in that role, and we did some really exciting stuff here in Ireland, in particularly on infrastructure and energy infrastructure, and that was a really major period from the point of shaping my view on the role of banks in putting in place critical infrastructure for economic and social development.
As you said, I'm sure that was a really challenging time. And one thing you mentioned, one quality you mentioned, is the importance of resilience. I'd love to know, obviously now you're the CEO of one of the largest banks in Ireland. It's a major European bank. I'd love to know, you deal with so much stress, and I'm sure there's a lot of setbacks and so forth. How would you advise students and people generally to build this and develop resilience? And kind of what are your strategies?
Well, you don't live your life in a straight line. It would be nice if you could, but you don't. And everybody in their personal life and their professional life, they're going to encounter obstacles, setbacks, and you just got to pick yourself up. When you're knocked down, you got to pick yourself up and keep at it. And it isn't always easy, but it is the only option. There's no alternative. There's no real alternative to picking yourself off the ground, dusting yourself off, and getting on with the job at hand, and learning from the failings, and learning from how you've dealt with the obstacles that presented themselves.
And I know I'd love to know kind of which leaders, in finance or outside of finance, which you admire. I know one you mentioned is Paul Polman, former Unilever CEO. I mean, I'd love to know kind of what qualities do you admire about these leaders, and I'd love to know kind of your own leadership style and these qualities.
Yeah, so I regard leadership as a privilege. It's an extraordinary privilege to lead an organization like this, and I think that you can sort of subdivide the community of leaders into two categories. You've got managerial leaders, and you've got transformative leaders. As I look at it, it's temporary. It's passing. You're not going to be here indefinitely, and I think that the greatest leaders regard themselves and behave in a way that they are stewards of a business, and the people that I really admire are the ones that have been transformative in terms of their impact on the organizations that they've led, and that have behaved like stewards, and by stewardship, what I'm talking about there is you're given this opportunity, and you're conscious from the moment you get it that it is incumbent upon you that when the inevitable happens and you are passing on the baton to the next generation, that you pass on the baton that you basically pass on an organization that is in stronger position than the organization that you inherited. So, I'm very much driven by making sure that the organization that I lead is in a far better, stronger, more resilient, more sustainable position than it was when it was given to me, because it is a temporary role. I'm in role now 6 years, but I am very, very much focused on ensuring that when that baton is passed on, that people will look back and say, well, the business is in better shape, it's in stronger shape, and it's making an ever more meaningful contribution, not only financially, but also socially.
We've definitely, strong results, and we look forward to March 5th.
Yeah, we'll say as little about that as possible at this stage for obvious reasons. I've a pretty good feel for where we ended 2024. 2023 was, I described it as an exceptional year in the history of the bank, And 2024 was a very, very strong year as well.
So,
but all will be revealed on March the 5th.
We won't. I don't know when
the
this will be
SMF
released.
and all other shareholders.
So I'd love to talk. So, it's been an exceptional year, and I'd love to talk about culture, because maybe this is something. I mean, when we were very lucky to have Colin Keller, chairman of UBS, on, and he said one of the key aspects of a successful financial firm is culture. But I'd love to know from your perspective, firstly, what does that mean to you, and what are your thoughts on culture, or what would you say are the key qualities of it?
I think it's vitally important. Peter Drucker put it beautifully when he said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And if you are serious about sustainability, you have to be focused not just on what you do, but how you do it. And that's how I look at culture. It's about your approach to doing business. It's about your approach to engaging with all your stakeholders. And it's about having a long-term focus in terms of the values that you try to instill in the organization. And here at AIB, we've got 6 very, very clear values that we try to live by every single day. And ultimately, that is what will sustain our performance through economic cycles, through the ups and downs of the economic cycle. But we will be sustained right the way through by how we do our business. Not what we do, but how we do it. And it is really important to me that we engage with all our stakeholders in a respectful way and in an open and transparent way. And that allows us to be the best at what we do, to be the best versions of ourselves. But also it's very, very important in terms of attracting talent. Because ultimately, what is going to sustain the business? Your balance sheet is important, your product suite is important, but it's the people who are the vital difference, the people you attract to invest their time and their expertise in your business. They are the vital difference.
So we're in an interview room now, and if someone's interviewing for a role at AIB, like what I know you employ over 10,000 people. Like, how do you identify talent? And I'm sure through your career you've hired many people. What do you think?
Yeah, you look for a set of attributes. I'm actually pretty indifferent as to what academic discipline somebody has pursued. What I look for is competence, obviously, character, judgment, resilience is very, very important. To me, and courage. Courage is a key differentiator. If somebody's going to reach their full potential, they have to have the appetite to push themselves to the limit, to explore the limits of their own capabilities, to be always open to new learning and new development. Because when you leave college, that's not the end of your learning. You've just been equipped with a toolbox. You've been given a way to look at the world, a way to analyze problems. There's a huge learning opportunity, a development opportunity when you leave college, when you actually put into practice what you've spent 4 years, 5 years learning. And it comes down to appetite and courage. You have to be willing to push yourself outside your own safe zone.
Well, on the point of courage, excuse me, I thought it was fascinating researching your career and reading how even in like late 2003, you were talking about how the prices in the housing market were kind of, it was like I can't remember the quote that was used, but it was like, this speculatory fever here or something along those lines. So, I mean,
yeah,
not looking completely off, but I mean that would obviously take some courage, right? To be early on the.
Yeah, I'm very skeptical when I hear people say this time it's different, or there's a new paradigm. But like when valuations get fundamentally out of kilter with fundamentals, no amount of new paradigms are going to allow that to persist indefinitely. And I suppose that was I was very conscious of that at the time, that we'd had a situation where you had a massive increase in output in housing. I think that 06, 07, you had 97,000 houses being built in Ireland. You had a massive expansion of credit in the economy. It was the risks, given that pace of activity and given the amount of credit that was washing around this economy and other economies, the risks to the stability of the system were increasing. And one of the things about banking that intrigues me is that it hasn't fundamentally changed in terms of the rudiments of it in 300 or 400 years. How we do it has fundamentally changed. How we do it has fundamentally changed in the last 20 years. If you think about retail banking, today the vast majority of our customers engage with us using mobile technology. 30 years ago, we didn't even have phone banking. 30 years ago, if you wanted to engage with your bank, you came in during the 4 or maybe 5 hours that the branch was open. But beyond that, you couldn't, you weren't able to engage because the channels to engage weren't there. And we have seen a massive democratization of financial services in the last number of years, to the point that our services are far more accessible to a far greater number of people than they would have been at any point in the past. And I'm very conscious of the fact that for the vast majority of our customers, they're using this mobile technology for everyday transactions. Now, there are moments in our customers' lives when they want direct engagement, when they want human engagement. If there's issues arising, if they're looking for advice, if they have a problem, if there's a fraud issue, or if they've got a huge, big financial decision to make, such as a mortgage. The great majority of our customers will want human engagement then. So one of the things that I'm very conscious of is that we need to be available to our customers in the way that they want to engage with us. And we engage primarily using the mobile technology, but we also engage through 170 branches across the country, and through our call centres. And so it's very important for us in terms of our value proposition that we have that multi-channel approach available to the people who choose to bank with us.
I'd love to go on a point you mentioned on AIB sustainability, especially under your time as CEO in the past 5 years. And obviously in November, we heard about the great news with AIB Trinity Climate Hub. Could you maybe talk about why this is something that is very important to you in AIB?
It's the biggest single opportunity in the history of banking. The financing the transition to a lower carbon future is the biggest opportunity. There's nothing that has ever come close to it in terms of the scale of investment that is needed if we are going to put our planet on a sustainable path. And so that creates a major business opportunity. It also has positive externalities in the sense that we are writing good long-term business that is good for our shareholders, it is good for our customers, good for our business, but also has positive consequences outside of those sort of very direct stakeholder groups. And it was an identification of the scale of the opportunity, a view that we could build a real centre of expertise here in Dublin. We also have teams in New York and London in the area, and that we could make a material difference in terms of our impact in driving the transition, or in accommodating the transition to a lower carbon future, while writing business that is good from the point of view of the balance sheet. We find ourselves in a position where we are exceptionally strong from a capital and liquidity perspective. Our loan to deposit ratio is in the 60%. So we have the capability and the ambition and the expertise and the capital needed to make a material difference here. And that allows us to not only grow our balance sheet and grow our loan book in a sustainable way, but it also allows us to have a significant degree of geographic diversification that doesn't involve us having large physical presences internationally.
Right, yeah.
It's very much driven from Dublin, London, and New York.
And another point you mentioned and you emphasize is the importance of education. Obviously, we're a student society, part of a university. Could you talk about why this for you is so important?
That's the greatest investment you can ever make. There is no greater force for social or economic good, in my view, than education. Certainly education fundamentally changed the path of my own life. And again, talking about positive externalities, you can't have any greater positive externality than investment in education. It's brilliant for the individual, but it is brilliant for society and brilliant for economic potential as well. So, in terms of equity, in terms of equality of opportunity, it's so vitally important. And I think that societally around the world, we don't ascribe enough value to the work of third level institutions and second level institutions and primary institutions, because they are such an important driver of progress. They're a vital partner in progress, and ultimately a country's prospects and a society's prospects are driven by a reasonably small number of factors. Demographics are important. The shape of your population is important. Skills of the population are important. The level of educational attainment of your population, absolutely vitally important, and capital. So if you have a positive demographics and a well-educated workforce with access to capital, you have so many of the vital ingredients for long-term success, not just for the individual, but also for society. And I look back at this country, and we marked 100 years of independence 3 years ago. And I grew up in an Ireland that was fundamentally different. I was to the Ireland we live in today. I was born in 1970, and it was a country that had a population, I suppose, in the mid 3 millions. It had, when I went to college in '87, we had 1 million people that worked in the state. We now have 2.7 million people that work in the state. We have a population that, having sort of struggled to hold it in the mid 3 millions, is now comfortably above 5 million. In terms of so many key indicators, it's a country that has been transformed, not only financially, but even in terms of health indicators, longevity. And now we have challenges, very significant challenges. Some of the challenges are actually driven by the pace of growth, the extraordinary increase we've seen in our population, and the fact that the number of people living in the state is bigger than anybody expected. The number of people working in the state is bigger than anybody expected, and that imposes significant challenges on the infrastructure that is there to support our lives. And it is vitally important, if we are to sustain the current level of economic and social development, that we see investment in critical social and economic infrastructure, in education, in health, in housing, in transport. And that will ultimately underpin the sustainability of the Irish economic model. But it is the Ireland that we live in today is unrecognisable from the Ireland of the 1980s. It is a fundamentally different country in so many ways, and in my view, it's a lot better. It's a better, nicer country than it was, certainly the country that I grew up in.
Celtic Tiger to Celtic Phoenix.
Well, there was no mention of Celtic Tiger in the 1980s. We had unemployment of 17%. We had a budget deficit of over 10%. You had this ongoing flow of some of our brightest and best coming out of places like Trinity and going abroad immediately, because this was a country that did not have opportunity for all. And that has fundamentally changed. And it's a country that has been enriched by diversity. Diversity of people, diversity of thought, diversity of views. It is a far better country than it was in the 1980s.
Obviously now, it's, you just look at Dublin, it's a beautiful office, it's a fantastic city, you've got tech. But looking, say, at finance, I'd love to know your view on, because obviously you've worked in the city and we have London just across the sea. How do you think Irish banks and financial firms can, compete more and become better at retaining talent? Because I know this is also something new.
Yeah, so London is one of the world's great financial capitals. It's an amazing place.
Could we see Dublin take number one spot?
I'm ambitious, but I'm also realistic, and I don't foresee Dublin ever being one of the world's greatest financial capitals. But we can be world leaders in niches. And if you look at something like aviation finance, Dublin is the world's capital of aviation finance, thanks to the vision of people like Tony Ryan, thanks to extraordinary work being done by individuals like Angus Kelly in AirCap, and of course the likes of the SMBCs and Avalon and so on, and others. But we now have built this sort of centre of expertise, this cluster of knowledge, this cluster of capital, which puts Dublin into a position where it is a capital for a particular niche of finance. And my view, and this is something a view I hold very strongly, is that we can do the same in terms of green finance. There's no reason why Dublin or Ireland can't be a capital for green finance. And I can promise you one thing, AIB will not be found wanting when it comes to the role that we will play in training, educating individuals, in being highly professional in terms of how we approach this and having the capital to back it up. So while I don't foresee a future for Ireland as a global financial capital in the entirety of the array of financial services that are out there in the way that London is and New York is, I do believe we have an amazing opportunity open to us to be a capital of green finance. And that's where so much interesting work is going to happen in the next number of years. It's very, very exciting.
And I know another area, kind of shifting our focus now more to you, I know another area people would be very curious is your routine as the CEO of AIB. Could you maybe talk about your morning routine?
Well, the morning routine starts with early. I am blessed with by being an early riser. So I read, obviously scan the wires for overnight news. I read a I don't want to embarrass particular outlets now by actually listing the newspapers that I read, but certainly I have the Financial Times is a must-read. We have very good local newspapers here in Ireland as well, which are a must-read in this job. And I tend to be in the office fairly early. By the time I get here, I'll have read the key stories from overnight. There's no real sort of set day. There's no typical day in this role. You obviously have set pieces. So we've got our board meetings. You have critical stakeholder engagement, such as engagement with regulators, with shareholders, and then, of course, with colleagues. So there's no particularly typical day. Days tend to be long. There's no scope or opportunity for boredom. It's fairly full on, but I really enjoy it. And I back to what I said earlier, I regard it as a privilege. It's a huge privilege to have this role in this organization, and you've got to bring energy and enthusiasm to how you conduct yourself over the course of the day. And but the bulk of the time is engaging with stakeholders. That's the job of the CEO. I think is reasonably simple. You obviously have to engage with the board in setting out a strategic vision for the organization, but outside of that and outside of external stakeholder engagement, which is hugely important, your key role is ensuring you've got the right people in the right jobs to lead the organization, to drive the organization, and to deliver on our purpose. So it's, I would not under any circumstances underestimate the importance of surrounding yourself with good professionals who are characterized by the sort of attributes that I listed a while ago.
And we also heard the overnight news, well, not overnight news, but news yesterday, the government reducing their stake in AIB. I know this is something you mentioned as well last year about the possibility for this happening entirely in 2025. I think, Minister Donoghue mentioned that yesterday. Could you explain maybe what does this mean for the shareholders of AIB and the value you see going forward?
It's been a long journey from the point where the state needed to, or no, the state didn't need to. The bank needed the support of the state and the support of Irish taxpayers to remain functioning and to remain viable. Back in between 2008 and 2011, and the bank all but collapsed. It would have collapsed but for that injection of capital from Irish taxpayers. And we have been working to repay that confidence, to support primarily our core market in the best way that we could, and ultimately to repay that confidence. There's not going to be any sort of significant material difference in how we run the organization as a consequence of the state's departure, or likely departure from the register in calendar 2025, shareholder register in calendar 2025. But I do think that it will be a validation and a vindication of the strategy that we've pursued. And I do think that by us returning that capital to the state, it gives an opportunity to policymakers to deploy that capital in other areas in the economy, areas where we have pressing needs, such as infrastructure, such as the energy grid, such as housing, such as transport, and so on. But it doesn't make a material difference in terms of how we're going to run the organization. But it is important from a normalization perspective that we're going to become a normal, functioning financial institution once again, that is privately owned. And I think that's very important from a perception perspective, particularly for international investors. And I think it's important from the point of view of morale in the organization and our ability to attract talent. And so I can see there's an array of positives out there. Will it make a difference day to day in terms of the decisions we make? It won't. Because right the way through, even when we were owned 99.9% by the state, we continued to have a discipline in terms of market engagement, in terms of our reporting, in terms of engagement with the broad investor community. So we, notwithstanding the fact that we had one very, very, very large shareholder, we continued to behave as if we had multiple shareholders in terms of our communication and in terms of our market engagement. So again, there won't be a change there. But it is important in terms of the signaling internally and externally about the quality of the strategy and its execution in the past number of years.
And you mentioned communication there. I'm just looking at the time, so kind of wrapping up now and looking at advice for students. One of the qualities you mentioned at the start of the conversation was communication.
Yeah.
How do you advise to kind of develop this skill? Because you said it's very important for especially this industry.
I think it comes back to pushing yourself. I don't think there's very few people who at birth or in their early years had this burning desire to sort of be good communicators or to speak to large crowds or to be conscious of their messaging and conscious of how they communicate. But it's such a vital skill. And it goes back to what I was talking about, pushing yourself out of comfort zones. The vast majority of people don't like speaking in debating societies or to large groups of people. But it is such a vital differentiator. And it is so important in terms of how we conduct our daily business. Because notwithstanding AI and technological advance, you still can't beat face-to-face interaction in an open, understandable way, and that's what communication is ultimately about. And I would have thought that COVID and Zoom and Microsoft Teams was going to fundamentally alter how we engage with people and how we communicate with people. But the desire of the human species to engage on a face-to-face basis hasn't been dimmed by the advances we've seen in technology in terms of communicating over distances. I see that in terms of roadshows. I thought that investor roadshows would become a thing of the past once we all moved to Zoom as we had to, or Microsoft Teams as we had to during the COVID years. But as it became possible to engage once again on a face-to-face basis, people wanted it. Investors wanted it. They wanted to talk to you directly. Your customers want to talk to us directly. Our stakeholders want to talk to us directly. And having good communication skills is something I think that you can't underestimate. So my advice would be push yourself, develop a degree of fluency and comfort in terms of how you communicate, and put a huge amount of effort and time into ensuring that you are communicating to the best of your abilities.
Well, this is definitely better recorded in person as opposed to Zoom or Teams. So thank you. And I suppose, look, there's so much I'd love to ask you. I mean, you kind of talked about valuations. We can talk about AI, the Irish economy, and so forth. But I guess as a final question, what would your advice be to students at Trinity now, or if you could turn back the clock to yourself, what would one piece of wisdom you would give?
I think I might be short on wisdom now.
Very on the spot question.
Yeah, it certainly is. You've got an amazing opportunity. Your peers in Trinity have had the advantage of years of spending time in an extraordinary institution, and an institution that we're very proud to partner with in AIB, and maximize the opportunity that's been presented to you. The world is your oyster, and you're in an extraordinarily strong position to make the most of that opportunity, and don't waste a moment. Go for it.
Thank you so much. Well, we're very privileged, and we're very privileged to have you again. So thank you. Thank you for the time.
Thank you very much indeed.
You have been listening to the Trinity SMF podcast. You can find more of this podcast on our website, www.trinitysmf.com, and follow us on our social media to find out more about the podcast releases, upcoming events, and much more. Thank you again for listening, and stay tuned.